Let's start with one of the most notorious figures, Pablo Escobar. His name still sends chills through the streets of Colombia. As the leader of the Medellin cartel, Escobar was responsible for controlling 80% of the world's cocaine trade at the peak of his empire. He amassed an unimaginable fortune, becoming one of the richest men on the planet. But his wealth was soaked in blood. Escobar didn't just rely on money to get what he wanted. He used a brutal combination of violence and corruption. In the 1980s, he unleashed a wave of terror across Colombia. Buildings were bombed, government officials were assassinated, and whole communities lived in constant fear. His infamous phrase, plata o plomo, silver or lead, forced people to choose between taking a bribe or facing death. But despite the fear he instilled, Escobar saw himself as a champion of the poor. He donated vast sums of money, built housing for the underprivileged, and even funded local soccer teams. Some in Medellin saw him as a Robin Hood figure, though his acts of charity couldn't erase the violence he brought to his country. Escobar's reign of terror finally came to an end in 1993 when he was killed in a rooftop shootout with Colombian forces. His death marked the end of an era, but it didn't stop the wave of crime that would continue to plague Latin America. Next, we move to Mexico, where another infamous figure, Joaquin El Chapo Guzman, rose to power. Guzman was the leader of the Sinaloa cartel, one of the most powerful drug organizations in the world. Known not just for his brutal control of the drug trade, El Chapo was also a master of escape. In 2001, he famously bribed his way out of a maximum security prison, hidden in a laundry cart. But it was his 2015 escape that made headlines around the world when he disappeared through a mile-long tunnel built directly under his prison cell. El Chapo's cartel trafficked enormous amounts of drugs, including cocaine, heroin, and methamphetamine, into the United States. His operations stretched across multiple continents, and he became one of the most feared figures in the drug world. But no one is invincible. After years of evading authorities, Guzman was captured in 2016 and extradited to the United States, where he now serves a life sentence. His capture was a major victory in the war on drugs, but the violence in Mexico didn't stop with his imprisonment. Let's now shift our focus to one of Mexico's most infamous women, Sandra Ávila Beltrán, known as La Reina del Pacífico, or the Queen of the Pacific. She was not just another drug lord, she was one of the most powerful women in the Mexican drug trade. Ávila used her intelligence and connections to become a key figure in trafficking cocaine to the United States. Her charm and ability to navigate the male-dominated world of cartels made her a dangerous and influential figure. In 2007, Ávila was arrested and eventually extradited to the U.S., but her story highlights the important roles women have played in the criminal underworld, often in ways less visible to the public. In Brazil, we encounter a whole organization that has terrorized the country for decades, the Comando Vermelho, or Red Command. This criminal group began in the 1970s in Rio de Janeiro's prisons, but it quickly expanded its operations beyond prison walls. The Red Command controls drug trafficking, armed robberies, and kidnappings across Brazil, and its influence in the favelas is enormous. One of its most feared leaders is Fernandinho Beira-Mar, a drug kingpin who started his criminal career at a young age. Even after being imprisoned in 2002, Beira-Mar continued to run the gang from behind bars, communicating with his followers through coded messages. His influence shows just how powerful these organizations can be, even when their leaders are imprisoned. The Red Command's power in Rio's favelas has turned entire neighborhoods into battlegrounds, where heavily armed gang members clash with the police. It's a war that seems to have no end in sight, with innocent civilians often caught in the crossfire. From Brazil, we head to Bolivia, where Luis Garcia Meza, a dictator who seized power in 1980, used his position to enrich himself through the cocaine trade. His regime was backed by drug money, and under his rule, Bolivia became a major player in the global cocaine market. Garcia Meza's time in power was marked by human rights abuses, corruption, and violent suppression of opposition. After less than 2 years, Garcia Meza's government collapsed, and he was later convicted of drug trafficking and human rights violations. His downfall was a grim reminder of the dangerous intersection between politics and crime in Latin America. There are more names to add to this list. Griselda Blanco, the ruthless Colombian drug lord known as the Black Widow, who pioneered smuggling routes from Colombia to the United States. Raul Reyes, a commander in the FARC, the Marxist rebel group in Colombia that funded its operations through drug trafficking and kidnappings. And Manuel Noriega, the former dictator of Panama who played both sides, working with drug cartels while acting as a CIA informant. These outlaws weren't just criminals. They were symbols of the broader struggles facing Latin America. Political instability, poverty, and corruption created an environment where these figures could rise to power. They left behind a legacy of violence, fear, and destruction that continues to affect the region today. Each of these figures is a reminder that the story of crime in Latin America is more complex than it seems. They were feared for their cruelty, admired for their audacity, and hated for the suffering they caused. Their stories are woven into the fabric of Latin American history, and their legacies still shape the present. These were the most feared outlaws of Latin America, whose names are etched into the history of an entire continent.